there is this taboo. If I'm discussing the idea of my passing, that means that I'm willing it to happen, or I think it's going to happen soon. And that can be very difficult for a lot of people.
Coming to you straight from Fremont, California, this is the Fremont Podcast, dedicated to telling the stories of the past and present of the people and places of the city of Fremont, one conversation at a time.
Hello Fremont, this is James and we are Minutemen Blvd, Warm Spring. You are listening to episode 57 of the Fremont Podcast.
Now, here's your host, Ricky B.
So Shannon, I have you on here because we were talking about estate planning, and you do estate planning, right?
Correct.
So is that what you went to school for when you went down to LA?
For college, I studied psychology, and then I ended up going to law school in Boston at BU.
Okay.
And so sometimes people ask me, well, why did I become a lawyer after studying psychology, and why did I go into estate planning? And I think a big part of it is being able to make things accessible. Like, a lot of psychology is meeting people where they're at, kind of understanding what makes them tick, what makes them anxious, finding out the things that they don't know that they don't know.
Yeah.
And then law is obviously, being aware of regulations, being aware of how different systems work.
Yeah.
And I felt that being able to combine that social aspect of psychology as well as the practical skills of law in a manner that is for really important processes that people need but don't want to talk about or may get overwhelmed with, was really what I wanted to do.
That's awesome. So you noticed the kind of like that pairing early on. Like you, as you were doing psychology, you noticed, man, maybe you had an interest in law, and at some point you're like, these two things together could be really, really beneficial and really helpful. You saw that early on?
I would say at some degree I saw that on the earlier side. I think because a lot of times when we think about psychology, we think about counselors. And then when we talk about lawyers, we call them counsel, right? But nobody really thinks about how those can meld together, because a lot of people view lawyers as being, really serious, really hard to get along with. Maybe you don't trust them. Maybe they have ulterior motives. But if we can see them as counselors, people who are guiding you through, helping navigate different processes, that's really what I think, can be a really nice match.
I love that. I really do. And I think that one of the things that happens when anybody is dabbling in anything that has to do with law is there's just like this fear of this unknown, right? It's like...
Certainly, because I think that when people are thinking about law, they do tend to get very overwhelmed, and it's hard to know where to start. And then when you start putting in things like cultural competency, religious differences, different fears or taboos people may have, that makes it that much more important to get the person and to see where they're at and how you can help them through something that otherwise they might just start by themselves and then just stop because it's too much.
That's interesting, because when I think of law, like more immediately, the thing that comes to my mind is what I would term, and I'm sure there's probably other terminology for this, but a reactionary law. And that is, I did something wrong or I got myself into a situation and I need help correcting the situation or getting me through, navigating through the situation. But with estate planning, it seems that it's almost preventative. Like, in other words, it doesn't have as much of a reactionary element to it as it does saying, if something does happen, then this is how I want to navigate, the legal space. So that their cultural or their religious influences may not factor as much into somebody that's about ready to go to jail as it would be to say, what am I going to leave if something happens to me? And that's where some of those other cultural or religious influences might actually take a part in that.
Definitely. And I think you hit on something that I consider a lot is the element of firefighting versus preventing the fire.
Okay.
And in really thorough estate planning, I think that's a lot of the prevention. We are doing this at a time when hopefully our clients can still really think about what their decisions are, feel like they aren't pressured to make decisions too quickly, and we can really think through a lot of different situations. I like to tell my clients that a lot of the things that we discuss are unlikely to happen or are very long term, but we still want to make sure we're addressing it so that nothing comes as a surprise to the family, so that there's no need for the court to get involved unnecessarily, because we have thoroughly addressed these different issues in that line of trying to prevent, as opposed to firefighting if there is an issue and there wasn't that level of preparation.
Wow, that's cool. So what is it that got you into estate planning in the first place? I mean, we talked about psychology and then just law in general, but out of all the things you could have chosen as a lawyer, what was it about estate planning that kind of grabbed your attention or that made you kind of head that direction?
To be honest, when I went to law school, I did the Trust and Estates class because I thought that it would be really practical, but I didn't expect that was what I was going to do until I started kind of understanding how to change this narrative of something that seems really morbid into something that can be very collaborative and very special, a meaningful way to pass on this legacy, to work with clients on something that otherwise they would have been too afraid or too nervous to do. And I think that a big shift in my personal life was getting married, becoming a mom, and understanding how vital this is and how to really shift that focus on, originally thinking it was morbid, but now this is a way to actually really guide people.
I'm thinking about this. I hate this. I don't have any kind of estate plan for myself.
That's what happens. A lot of my clients are doctors, are lawyers, are nurses, and that happens. We're all so busy. This does bring up conversations that sometimes can be difficult to have, and like I mentioned, cultural, religious aspects can keep people from getting to doing this.
If you don't mind me asking, that might get a little personal, but I mean, what kind of religious or cultural influences have you seen that have kind of challenged this idea of estate planning? What are some of the ones that you've come across?
So in terms of the concern about starting to talk about it, for a lot of the East Asian cultures, there is this taboo. If I'm discussing the idea of my passing, that means that I'm willing it to happen, or I think it's going to happen soon. And that can be very difficult for a lot of people. So, if I'm dealing with a family who is of East Asian descent, there may be a lot of, we're not expecting this to happen. Something that in Chinese culture, people might say is, this will happen at Bai Nian, which means 100 years. So just reminding people, this is not something that we are anticipating will happen soon, but we're just preparing diligently for that.
Wow.
And giving people that reassurance. Obviously, there are situations where somebody is very sick, but in most cases, this is something that is more of a theoretical approach to make sure it's done right. But in terms of the religious aspects, I would say that does come down to things like, what is your wish with regards to, would you want to be buried? Would you want to be cremated? Or the different options that I'm sure are going to come up over the next decades in the world. Even a few years ago, a lot of Catholic clients weren't aware that you could be cremated in the Catholic religion. And the Pope, one of the previous popes, had actually made a statement saying that is something that Catholic individuals can do. Wow. Because it was just something that was so misunderstood.
Okay. Are these things that you're still learning, or is this something, did you kind of know that these would be issues that you might have to deal with?
I think as humans, we're always learning. There's always something new that's evolving and that we're trying to, be more competent with. But I think that a lot of my upbringing at least brought me the introductions to these sorts of topics. Like as a, Chinese American, my parents actually were a little on the abnormal side. They always had an estate plan when I was growing up. They would let us know, yeah, if something happens to us, then you and your brother are going to live with this uncle. And even now, if they go on vacations, they'll tell us, here's where the estate planning binder is. Here's where all of the passwords are, which is very novel for our culture. But then I did also see, the concerns about speaking to attorneys and divulging personal information. So that already got me to kind of get that cursory view of what certain cultures might view. And I think school as well. I think also as being a Christian person, having different conversations with people and getting to know kind of what makes them tick, what they may be concerned about, helped me to see, okay, well, what are these issues and how can I learn more either through education or through having more discussions with people.
We'll be right back with this conversation in just a moment. Are you looking to buy or sell your home this year? The Petroselli family has been in our community for decades. It started with John Petroselli building homes all around our community. And later, John and Jennifer Petroselli became partners as real estate agents. Whenever I visit Jennifer at Petroselli Homes in Niles, she treats me like family, and I'm not in the housing market right now. If they treat me that way, I know that they'll treat you that way. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home, reach out to Jennifer Petroselli at Petroselli Homes in Niles. In fact, pull out Instagram right now, look up Petroselli Homes. I bet Jennifer's on Instagram right now. Shh. So Dale Hardware...
Hey, can I interrupt?
Okay.
I'm actually a little upset with Dale Hardware. I know they're a sponsor, but I'm a little upset with them. They have taken all the customer service and they haven't left any of it for the big box stores.
What are you talking about?
Have you been in a big box store?
Yes, I have.
There's no customer service. You go into Dale's, it's all there. That's just not fair.
That's true. And now, back to our conversation. What ways have you found this to be personally rewarding to you? I mean, when you're dealing with law, you kind of think of lawyers as being sterile or cold, or they just kind of deal with all the stuff that nobody else wants to deal with. But you're dealing with people's lives and their legacies and the way that they're remembered in the family. I mean, there's got to be a personal element where it's there's probably going to be some stories that you have that are both rewarding, you got to help with something and you kind of saw what your work did to kind of help prepare a family for a particular situation. There's probably got to be some really hard times too, where it's just really difficult to have some conversations with people.
Yeah, I think that for the more positive aspects, people tend to come to me because they do have people that they love, or because they do have very specific wishes that they want to make sure are addressed. And, being able to be there through a process, getting to know them, getting to understand them, sharing stories about my family. Sometimes if we're on Zoom calls, maybe they'll have their kids in the background, and really getting to understand someone in a friendship. Yeah. A lot of times. And then, I will have people come back to me several years later telling me they had another child, or if their children are getting older and they're trying to figure out what school to send them to. Keeping that relationship, yeah, I think, is really special because it shows that they trust me. Yeah. It also shows that they do think that, what I have to recommend is worthwhile. Yeah. So I think for me, I try to view the process as being one of a relationship, as opposed to maybe other people view it as a transaction. And that's really some way that I'm able to see how meaningful this is. Yeah. Every year at the end of the year, we send our yearly newsletter with what's going on in the law, what's going on with us. I always have a picture of the family. And it's really cool to have people respond how they're doing.
That's awesome.
As far as the difficult parts, I mean, there are people who will come to me because there has been a difficult diagnosis. And last year, I would say, was really the first year that I started getting multiple notifications of clients who passed away, and then being able to guide the families through the sorrow, guide them if they needed help with, any sort of paperwork or what to do. It was really, really emotionally devastating, but knowing that we were able to do it in a systematic manner, as opposed to the family having to go to court, having to deal with the probate process and that level of stress, I do feel very gratified that I was able to guide them through.
That's great. I'm trying to think of the way to ask this, because I think there's got to be different nuances for different areas. Has there been some challenges for you dealing with people who've come from other countries, dealing with people who have moved here? And then, I don't know, are there complications because of the immigration process, or is that something that isn't really a big issue?
I would say that it's not so much of an issue, but it's more of the education, because even if you're from a different state, for instance, in New York, the probate process is much simpler than it is in California.
Okay.
And so there are people who are very wealthy who will just, do a simple will in New York because they're not concerned about probate. Whereas in California, the system's very different. The probate court process is quite lengthy. It can be pretty expensive, and it can be very draining on the family. So a lot more of the emphasis here is on having a trust-based estate plan. And then if you come from another country, then you may have some familiarity with how things are done with succession over there. So a big thing is educating people. Okay, well, why is it that I'm telling you something that maybe you heard differently, from another friend who lives somewhere else, or something that you read on the internet, which may be outdated or doesn't actually apply here.
Google University, they have the answer for everything. Right?
I think that's the big thing, is just making sure, I'm not trying to trick you. I am trying to understand your situation and trying to make sure that you can process this in a manner that makes sense to you, that is accessible. And I'm not in the business of forcing anyone to do this, because people have to be ready. They have to have the mindset that this is what I'm ready for. I want to talk about these things. But at least gearing people to understand, okay, well, these are the issues that may come up in California.
What are some of the, that's really helpful. That's really interesting to think through it that way. What are some of the things that maybe might be misconceptions that people have immediately, especially like here in California? Because when I think of doing a will or doing a trust or whatever it is, I actually don't even know. You'll have to educate me. I'll have to be one of your clients here soon. Like, what are some of the misconceptions that people have? Like, when I think of it, I think it's a long, tedious process. I've got to answer a ton of questions. I don't know. I mean, it just kind of seems like daunting, and it's something that it seems overwhelming. But what are some of the things that you feel are things that are questions or misconceptions that people have, that in fact, when you get to talk to them, they're like, I didn't know that. If I would have known that, I would have done this a lot sooner.
I think a couple of things. The first is that whenever a celebrity passes away, the question that is always presented in the media is, did they have a will or did they not have a will? Which a will is something that is pretty universal in the United States, but that might not address the question of whether you need a trust, which, like I mentioned, that calculation might be more state specific as to whether more people will get that. So I think that a lot of people, the first thing is they think, okay, well, whenever it comes up in the media, they're talking about the will. So why do I need a trust? Or there is the misconception that doing estate planning is only for people who are extremely wealthy, who have to be concerned about their dynasty. And unfortunately, that's not the case. In California, for people, if they have young children, if they own a home, if they have a family member with special needs, or they have more unique wishes or family dynamics, those are all big reasons why people would want to consider an estate plan, because those are not things that would be addressed appropriately or addressed in the manner people might want if everything just goes through the probate court according to state law.
Okay. Wow. Are there any things that are kind of surprises for people on the flip side of that? Like they weren't expecting something and it ends up being a lot more work for them, or a lot things that they weren't thinking of?
Well, like I mentioned, for my particular process, I do like to think long term and think about scenarios that might not occur or will not occur.
Yeah.
And so when we're going through, we have what's called a design process where we're asking a bunch of questions, follow-up questions to really determine if A, then what? If B, then what? And I think that surprises even my other attorney clients because they may not have thought, oh, I didn't think we had to think about these circumstances. And again, even though it's unlikely to happen, we still want to make sure that we are being thorough. This is not, for my firm, this is not some fill in the blank thing where everyone's comes out the same. You know, we do have to make sure that we are considering everyone's unique circumstances, and people are not always aware that that could be the process.
So there are other things that are of interest to you as well. I know that we mentioned briefly before we started Congenital Heart Defect Awareness. Tell me about that. What is it that you find, or what has grabbed your attention about that, or tell me your history with that a little bit.
So I have 2 children. I have an 8-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. And my son was born with a congenital heart defect called tetralogy of Fallot. Essentially, when I was pregnant, I went to go to that 20-week ultrasound and found out that there was something more severe than, the usual find out what is the sex of your baby. And then through that experience, we actually realized that we had a lot of community who was involved in that space. Like one of my husband's college roommates is a pediatric cardiologist at UCSF. My best friend is a pediatrician who did her residency at the medical school where the surgery for my child's diagnosis was first invented. One of my church friends from my law school days, her husband is a pediatric cardiologist as well.
Okay.
And I know that's kind of off the topic of what you were asking.
Yeah.
But so I really feel like God prepared us with the right people and the right resources so that we would be able to navigate this, knowing that if we didn't have those close connections, how difficult it would be to figure out things like the medical terms, to figure out what to do next and what things might look like in the future. And so, through that, then also finding out that congenital heart defects are actually much more common than people realize. The typical number is approximately 1 in 100 babies will be born with some sort of a heart defect.
Wow.
Whether it's something that resolves by itself, whether it's something that's more severe and requires surgery, it really just depends. But so going through that process with my son, having to get open heart surgery when he was 30 days old, and, really building community with people who were going through the same thing. Now, I'd say every year I get several friends who will contact me and say, hey, my friend just found out that their unborn baby is going to have a heart defect. Can you talk to them? I think that has really been quite meaningful. I feel like God put that in our journey so that not only would we have been equipped to get through it ourselves, but that we as a family can also highlight the topic that people may not know about and also be there for others that may be going through similar situations.
Wow. Yeah, we just had a baby, 6-month-old. And it's interesting because you go through a lot of those early checkups and you try to figure out if there's anything wrong or if there's any signs of something that, you want signs of good news, not signs of bad news, or complicated news or whatever. And I know that when you even at those moments of of the unknown, you're still worried that even though you're told everything's great, is there something that's going to be missed or something that you're later going to have to work through in order to be able to enjoy the birth of that child or whatever. And I think that sometimes. Kind of with a lot of things like that, the fear of the unknown we mentioned, like there's a sense of loneliness that comes with that, where you're like, you kind of feel like you're the only one. But when there's other people out there to come around you who've either gone through it or they know how to be able to, be there for you and come alongside you, I think that's just really, really great. Have you've sensed that yourself?
Yeah, I think that community is what we're made for. As people, we are made to find camaraderie in others, to console others when they're going through a tough time, to, lift others up when we want to celebrate with them. And that comes with both the good and the not so good. And I think that in this world, a lot of times we want to only focus on the good, but when there are difficult situations, that's when it's even more important to be vulnerable and to be there for others in a manner that they might not have expected, but it really can be quite life-giving.
Yeah, that's great. I know in 2019, Lily May, the mayor, she made a proclamation that February 7th through the 14th,
Correct.
which is coming up, is Congenital Heart Defect Awareness Week in Fremont. And so I think that's one of the ways that the community can become more aware of these sort of things, because I hear of these awareness weeks and months and stuff like that, and sometimes they have a direct connection with me in my life, but sometimes I know nothing about it. But I think being able to make more people aware of these sort of things, and specifically this congenital heart defect that might be people might have to deal with, I think it's really important and very, very helpful.
Yeah, and I think that, we're surrounded with so much information. There, like you said, there's so many awareness weeks, or there's National Ice Cream Day or National Blueberry this day. And it might not resonate with everyone, but having that, even that little sense of familiarity might turn on that light bulb for someone who realizes, hey, this is something I can learn more about. Or, hey, I know somebody who mentioned this. Maybe this is an opportunity for me to reach out to them and see what they might need. So
speaking of the community, what are some of the things that you enjoy in our community? What are some of the things that you've been involved with, or what are some of the things that you love about our community?
We have been here for 9 years, and we have gotten quite involved. Right now, I would say we are taking a little break, and cherishing the time with our kids. But in the past, I've done a lot of community outreach. I was working with Fremont Union City Newark Mothers Club. I was on the board for the Friends of Children with Special Needs and a part of Fremont Education Foundation. Wow. Right now, the big thing that I'm doing is I'm helping our school's parent-teacher organization to get things running.
Okay.
But I think that being involved in the community has been a really good way to get to know people, get to know what the needs are here, and also find ways to, really celebrate what we have and try to get more people involved.
That's cool. Yeah.
I think that it's so busy here, and people do have the willingness to give back. They do have the willingness to participate, but when they aren't aware of how, and they don't have someone there to guide them to that, it can make it that much more difficult. And so when we are able to provide that resource and that relationship, then hopefully we can ignite a fire and be able to, not a literal fire, but be able to, really create some wonderful things in this community.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I think that, and that's one of the reasons, I probably say this more often than I should, but it's one of the reasons I started the podcast, is like to allow people to become more aware of the things that are going around, that are happening in our community, the type of people that are living in our community, the things that they can do to be involved in other people's lives within the community. And I think that's one of the things that I love to see each time I do an interview, is to hear another thing that somebody's doing that's making a difference in the community, and that they're making a difference in the people that are living around them. So I just think that's really, really cool. Wow. Well, so I'm going to wrap this up, but I'm curious. So I don't have an estate planned. What would you say to me, or tell me now what you would tell me if you were to say, if obviously estate planning, as you know, because partly it's your job, but just as you've explained, is important. So what is it that I would need to know about estate planning that might help me take the next step in doing that?
I think the big thing is positing it in a positive manner. We love our families, or we love our pets, or whatever it is that you want to benefit. And we want to make sure that those wishes, that legacy really go through in a seamless manner. And it's not that we expect anything bad to happen to you, but it is prudent to be considering these things while you are still in good health and still have the mind to be able to make the decisions. Yeah. Unfortunately, the toughest calls that I get are when someone says, I have a family member, they're going to hospice quite soon. Can we do the estate plan for them? And unfortunately, most of the time that answer is no, because they are not mentally aware to make these decisions. And that is really the toughest thing, that the family knows this is an important thing to have, an important process to have gone through, but they've lost the ability to do so.
Yeah.
So even though we don't expect anything to happen to most clients anytime soon, we are preventing those sorts of situations. We are doing it out of love as opposed to out of fear. Wow. And I think the biggest thing when people are considering estate planning is to take the process seriously. I know we live in a society now when everything's about doing things the quickest way. How can I do this instantly with the least amount of commitment? And we do really have to consider what the quality of the service is, how we want to make sure that this actually fits us. And so that is a really important element for people to be considering. Is it that you just want a few pieces of paper that say something, or do you want to make sure that this is really a reflection of your family's needs and you've created a relationship with a trusted advisor to ensure that things do work well with that regard, but also if there are other issues that come up, that you have somebody who you can go to for advice.
Wow. So I can't just make a simple statement on record like this and post it on the podcast and say that's what I want for my stuff.
I can't guarantee that would work for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that advice. That's good. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for being on the podcast. If people are interested and curious about planning their estate, I'll put whatever I can in the show notes. But what are ways that they can get a hold of you?
So we do ask for potential clients to fill out a short intake form before we set up a consultation. That way we can make sure what their needs are, make sure that we'd be able to have a productive conversation. So that's really the first step. So people can get in touch, by going onto our website, which is www.liushairlaw.com. And that's really the first step. Then we're able to have that introduction call to get to know people, see where they're at. It's really meant to be no pressure, more of the education to see, if we'd be a good fit and if they're at that right place in their life to move forward.
That's awesome. Well, very good. I'll find that website, put it in the show notes so people can look down below and they can click on that. But it's been a pleasure talking with you, Shannon.
Likewise.
And I talked with a dentist, and she was talking about making people smile better and their teeth better. And I was thinking about, man, I could do some work on my teeth. Now I'm thinking I could do some work on my estate planning.
There's always something you can do, whether you're at that right place for many reasons. It's to be determined.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for being a part of the Fremont community.
Oh, thank you. We're glad you're here too.
Awesome. Thanks.
This episode was hosted and produced by Ricky B. I'm Gary Williams. Andrew Cavett is the editor. Music is provided through soundstripe.com. You can find links to our social media and other content at thefremontpodcast.com. Be sure to subscribe wherever it is that you listen so you don't miss an episode. And if you're so inclined, leave a kind review so that others can find the podcast. Join us next week on the Fremont Podcast.
Also, a lot of the nature here is really cool.
That's right. Yeah, you can get easy access to so many different places in nature, like the hiking trails and the parks and stuff that are around here. Is pretty awesome.
It really is. And I think that it's just about getting out there.
Okay.
And I think even having so much close by, sometimes people are unaware of what's around. And so being able to have things like social media and have people that you trust that you can ask for suggestions, it really makes this community that much more intimate.
Yeah, that's awesome. I find that interesting. It's kind of like this interesting phenomenon. I think the closer you are to something, even if it's pretty spectacular, I think the more often you find people that have never experienced it. Like, I used to work at REI, and I would talk about going to Yosemite. And of course, I moved here from the East Coast, and when I got here, Yosemite was like this big rage, like, oh, I can't believe you're so close to Yosemite.
Yeah.
And then I would get to talking to people as I was working at REI, and they were like, yeah, I've lived here my whole life, and I've never been to Yosemite. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, why? But I think what it is, honestly, is I think that people, because it is so close and because it is so common as part of a conversation or a place, that is close on a map, I think people just think, well, I can go there anytime. Like, if I decide to go there, I can go there anytime. I just haven't decided to do that yet. Whereas people around the world kind of like make it a destination stop, so they like travel across the world to come and visit. So
so it becomes a bucket list item for them, but for us, we kind of take it for granted.
This is a Muggins Media podcast.